We're live.
Yay!
Okay.
Hi!
Hello, everyone out there. So we're trying to stay in frame for two different frames, one for YouTube and one for
Looks good.
Facebook. So if we get kind of cut off, I apologize. We're trying to work within two different frames here. Well, before we get into this, just to let you know, if you haven't been aware, most people have been because I've been going live quite often this past 2 weeks. I'm launching Transforming Yourself. It's a model, the self-concept model. It's an online training. It's something I learned from Steve Andreas, and I'm very happy to be passing that on. Everything he's done for me, all the mentoring and everything that he's taught me, I'm able to pass on through this training, which is extremely exciting. So that launch ends this Saturday, and if you're interested in knowing more about that, you can take part of or sign up for the webinar, which is going on tonight. We had one yesterday. We have another one this evening at 5 Pacific Standard Time. We also have one tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So I am putting that in the description here.
The link is right here.
Right, but I can't do that on YouTube until afterwards. So
Okay.
after we talk, I'll put that on YouTube.
Okay.
Here I have with me Lulu.
Hi!
Lulu actually helped me in some of the demonstrations that we did during the training, Transforming Yourself. We shot some of the demonstrations for the online training. And Lulu is not an NLPer,
But I'm a personal transformation junkie, and I've done a lot of personal transformation, and you talk about this self-concept model like it's the ultimate game, and I have doubts about it. Is that true?
well, you've actually said that you had some transformations when we were in New York, and I was working with you and some people who you introduced me to from China.
Yeah. Well, what based on my experience, I feel like because of all the previous personal transformation and personal work that I've done, I was able to benefit a lot from the model, whereas I had this friend from China hasn't done any transformation work at all. And I look at her, I'm like, is she getting anything out of this? So I don't know, is this really for beginners?
I think so. I think it's much easier for people who have either NLP training or through personal development. They have a tremendous amount of self-awareness. That's going to help for sure. Mm-hmm. But you got to start somewhere. It's sort of like, I don't know if you can see this on camera, busted my lip this morning doing jiu-jitsu. So I started taking Brazilian jiu-jitsu. It's not quite 2 months, but I started taking Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and there are a lot of advanced people, black belts,
Okay.
brown belts, in the class. Of course, there's a lot of white belts too. And you could say, well, is this class really for beginners? Mm-hmm. Because there's all these upper belts there. Well, yes, it is. You just jump in, you start learning, and as my instructor said,
You just get beat up.
yeah, you get, you start learning your jiu-jitsu puzzle, and you start
Right.
putting it together. And so if are you going to have the kind of transformations that I had when I first started doing this, when I first started learning this? Probably not, because I had already had a lot of NLP training before that. So I was able to grasp it much quicker than somebody who has no NLP background, which you can still learn it.
Okay.
And you start putting that puzzle together of how you create yourself and how you create your self-concept and how you can change it and transform it. So yes, absolutely. Even if you don't have any NLP experience, this model is definitely for you. And you might be thinking, well, how do I know if this is for me? Like if it's something I want to do. Mm-hmm. And Lulu, who is very much into self-development and personal development, had some interesting questions for me this morning. I said, you know what, we shouldn't talk about this anymore. We should go live and discuss it. And it had to do, she used a much stronger term than painful. You want to say?
Well, I have to say, to be fair, I think my friend from China who had no personal development background whatsoever, after you took her to the model, we kind of tuned up her certain quality. And she was very excited about your training afterwards. And then, I mean, even though in the process, like I could see that she needs to work on other things that she may not be aware of before. Like, this is the thing. It's like you go through a model and you grow and you learn, oh, this is an area that I haven't worked on before. But I do think that she got a lot out of it. So I do agree with you that even a beginner would get something out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're
Absolutely.
more advanced, would you say that if you're more advanced, this model is going to exponentially amplify?
Absolutely. This was the missing piece for me that I was looking for, and I didn't even know I was looking for it. I just hit this plateau in NLP. I'd had some amazing changes and made amazing transformations, and it just seemed like I stopped, and I didn't know where to go. And I was asking all my teachers, hey, where do I go from here? What do I do? I was asking for challenges, and they were just like, well, just keep doing what you're doing, just keep practicing.
Okay.
And it wasn't until I met Steve Andreas, and he started, I guess he could tell what I was looking for. It's kind of interesting because he had already written a book. It was already about 10 years old when I started being mentored by him. But he could tell by the questions I was asking that that model was what I was looking for. But I didn't have a concept of it.
Okay.
I didn't have an understanding of like, oh yeah, you can map the self-concept and then elicit your values and then take those values and create them as qualities of who you are so that you behave
You're
in the ways.
basically creating yourself.
You're creating yourself, but it's also a process of self-discovery at the same time.
Right.
Because most people don't know what their values are. They don't know
Yes.
what they value. They especially don't know what they value apart from what they think they're supposed to value. That's like what your parents taught you, your society, your culture tells you that you should value. And then most people don't know the difference between their personal values and those other values. So they go chasing those values. Maybe they actually achieve them or fulfill them, and they're happy and excited for about 24 hours, and they go, what do I do now? It's not very fulfilling anymore, and now I have to go run out, and do I have to go chase another goal and achieve another goal, and does this get better, or am I on that hamster wheel going round and round? It's very different, though, when you fulfill one of your own personal values. You will feel when you do that, and you can do it as an ongoing thing, not like as something I have to go and achieve or raise some sort of bar. It's like, no, you can do this at any time. I'm doing it right now by being live and transferring, I guess, or giving
Yes.
this information out. I feel on purpose and I feel meaningful, and I'm fulfilling one of my values, which is passion, and one of my values, which is joy. I love talking about this. So I get to do this, and so right now I'm feeling my self-esteem is up, my confidence is up.
So there's no end. There's no limit.
End to it because
There's no limit.
Once you know what your values are, and then you install them, transform them, whatever you do in your self-concept, then you're always on. And then when you veer off, you have so much more information about when you're on and when you're off that it auto corrects, it self-corrects as you go through life. And so it's I didn't know, like I said, I didn't know this is what I was looking for, but Steve caught on to my questions and said, okay, go read this book. And so I had these major transformations, like blow the lid off transformations.
I think this is my next thing is like, if you are saying that this model is going to blow the lid off and it's going to exponentially amplify your previous personal transformations, if like any you have done, and I'll be like, well, the bigger transformation it is, the greater the fear there is, the greater the resistance is. Like, what's gonna happen? This is scary, right? Because I don't know if you had this experience, but in my personal transformation experience at the most intense, I had a lot of experiences like the ego death. It's like I died and come back to life many times. There's this one big major one, which I woke up from a terrifying dream during a meditation retreat. And then there are smaller ones. And then it's like, if I take this model and blow everything off the lid, and it's gonna happen again? No.
And so she's talking to me about this morning, and I'm like, what? Like, no, there's no pain in this. And
Really?
and she's like, what if you transform? And I was like, I was kind of almost confused about it. She said, well, have you ever experienced that ego death? And I was like, I knew exactly what you were talking about, but I had never called it that. And I said, yeah, I have. And she said, well, when, can you think of one? I was like, yeah, when I moved from New Orleans to Los Angeles, it was about a year. I was doing a lot of writing, a lot of yoga, a lot of meditation. So I was really like peeling back the onion, so to speak. And one morning when I was meditating, I thought I was dying, and there was no reason for it. It wasn't very physical, but I felt like I was turning into smoke, and then the smoke was just like dissipating, and it was super scary because I thought I was letting go of something, which was true. I was letting go. I was letting go of my life finally in New Orleans, and I was also terrified that if I did survive, that I would be unrecognizable to my loved ones. So there was a lot of terror, a lot of fear.
Oh, yeah.
But of course, when all this sort of passed over, I was in a place of, I guess, I don't want to say higher consciousness, I don't like that word, but like a greater sense of awareness and consciousness. I let go a lot, so I felt very light, and I felt more loving toward my loved ones. And I thought, well, of course they're going to know me, they're going to recognize me. I'm still, pretty much the same person. I just let go of a lot of stuff. So yeah, I've experienced that, and then I've experienced it since. That was probably the strongest time.
Right.
So when you asked me that, like, I went to that experience, and then I tried to connect the dots between what you were asking me about transforming yourself, like if they were the same thing. And I was
isn't that what happens? Transforming yourself is scary. I had like a dream of the end of this current reality, and I woke up from the dream. It was terrifying. But that was what was needed to shatter my ego, because my ego was about improving and improving and improving, and there's no end to that.
So I understand the question now. It makes perfect sense. And she thought that maybe some people are not signing up for the training because they may be a little afraid. And this might come from an unconscious level too. People fear change, and even though they want change, they actually don't want to do the change. They want what comes after.
Yeah, transforming yourself sounds great, but what's going to happen?
And so there could be a lot of people who have like a lot of unconscious fears about this, about transformation. And I'm so glad you asked me that, because immediately I started telling her everything that Steve taught me about this. And she was like, oh, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. So here's the thing. Those ego deaths are scary and hard because they kind of happen without you knowing they're going to happen. So that's one thing.
It's like life throws you those things.
Right.
Sort
So,
of.
but when you're using the transformation the self-concept model, you're purposefully doing it. So you know what to expect. You know you want the change, right? It's not just like popping out at you. The thing that's change itself is not painful. It's holding on to the other piece, holding on to the old stuff. That's painful, especially when life is pulling you forward and saying you got to let go of that stuff. It's sort of like holding on to the life raft when you're being rescued by a helicopter, and getting on the helicopter, that's the way to get out of there and be safe. But you're so used to that life raft being the safe place that you're cling to it, and that's going to ultimately get you into trouble. It's not going to be good for you to stay on the life raft. You need to get out of there. So it's the clinging, the holding on to the old that is painful. It's not the change itself. Think about how easily kids change and adapt. Why? Because they don't cling to the old stuff. They just naturally adapt and change. The other thing to it is, I think a lot of people think that you have to yell, scream, laugh, cry, experience pain in order to have transformation, because they've had transformations where those things were present. So yes, whenever I had that transformation, which you would call ego death, I cried. I think later I even laughed. And I had, all those things were there. So I thought, well, that's...
The transformation stories that you often hear about.
Right. So I thought, well, those things need to happen anytime I have a transformation. And then later I learned from Steve, he said, well, no, those things can be there, but they don't make the transformation happen. And he said it like this, and I thought this was a beautiful metaphor. He uses a lot of metaphors, by the way, and as soon as he says them, you go, oh, I know exactly what you mean. He said, think about vaccines. Vaccines are not very melodramatic or dramatic, but they do extraordinary things. You take a vaccine, it transforms your immune system. Suddenly you go from being vulnerable to a disease, a life-threatening disease, to being immune to a life-threatening disease. That's an amazing and extraordinary transformation. But it's so not dramatic. It's not like your body, it starts transforming and everything. You take a shot, and then it's done.
Okay.
and then now you're immune. So this works the same way. It also, I mean, you take a lot of the fear and the terror away of the change when you get clear about what you want and you say, yeah, I want this change. And then if you do have resistance come up, we do what we call a congruence check. We check in with that and we say, okay, well, where is this resistance coming from? What do we do about it? Or what am I going to do about it? And you negotiate with the resistance, which is usually just a part of you that wants to protect you. And so you have to give it some assurances and reframe it, which is all things that I teach you in the training. And then you keep moving forward. So it's not very dramatic, though the first transformation I did have when I was using the model, I did cry.
Usually the first one, yeah.
Well, yeah, it was unexpected. How powerful it was unexpected. I was using.
I think the first one you did for me, we were in New York. That one was very.
Yeah,
it has a powerful. It's a powerful one as well.
Do you want to talk about that?
I won't share the details.
Well, the first quality that I transformed was gratitude.
Yeah, mine was wisdom, being wise.
And for me, gratitude was what I would call, or what Steve calls in the training, an ambiguous quality. Because sometimes I felt it and sometimes I didn't. And I really wanted to feel gratitude often, because gratitude is one of those wonderful resources that we experience. When we experience it, we tend to naturally attract what we want and also gravitate towards what we want and wonderful opportunities. It helps put you in a state of abundance rather than scarcity. And as I started to transform that, I started to get very emotional because I started thinking about all the people who have helped me in my life. And so it wasn't like an emotional thing like I was in pain. It was an emotional thing like it was a beautiful thing. It was like, wow, there's so many people in my life who have helped me out in so many ways. And I just felt enormous gratitude. And once I built that quality and made it a certain quality, it's something that has never left me. I mean, and that's the whole idea behind this model, is to build these qualities in, and then to naturally and even unconsciously behave in these ways that we value.
Since you shared, I'll share too. Just briefly, so my quality was wisdom, that most of the time I think of myself as wise, but there is a period of time in my life from 21 to 22, it was very difficult. A lot of disasters happened in work life and family life, and when he asked me, is there a period of time that you just don't see this quality? I did find this period of time. It was about a year and a half, was very difficult. And I didn't think I was being wise. But once I plug into the quality and once I look into that, whether I really had the quality, I realized that, the wisdom was actually telling me that there's nothing more I could have done. I couldn't have done anything more or different. So that's the kind of self-acceptance that I always look for, because we Chinese beat up ourselves too much, you know that.
But you said that, well, you got emotional. I remember when it happened.
Right.
So what was that about?
It was just, I think it was grieving the fact that I couldn't have done anything more or better in order to save the situation. Those are other people's problems. They are not really my problems, but I took on the burden and I thought that like I could save other people, but I couldn't save them. They did whatever they did for themselves.
So was there a letting go?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And it happens a lot when you start to look into your timeline and you start looking for the quality and see if it exists or doesn't exist. It always exists, but sometimes you have to pull it through. So you did have wisdom in that time period.
Yeah.
You just thought of it as a different way. And then when you were looking back on it, you could say, well, okay, the wisdom here is that I have to let go of I couldn't have done anything about this.
I mean, I did my best.
You do your best, right.
But the outcome is not in my control.
Exactly. And that's wisdom.
That's wisdom.
That's being
Yes.
wise. Sometimes things are out of your control.
I know.
So you can let that go and it's not so painful anymore. You're not holding on to it. So yeah, you in this model, I'm not going to say that you won't experience any pain, because sometimes you will bump up against some painful emotions that you didn't realize were there, that were unconscious. But at least now you can finally deal with them. And once you deal with them, they will dissipate, they will go away. Because a lot of us have a lot of unconscious pain that we at a very young age experience, and instead of dealing with it, we just moved away from it and we isolated it, walled it off. But what happens when you do that is,
or just didn't have the resource to deal with it.
you didn't have the resource to deal with it, so you isolated, And then what happens is you're less whole, you're less, you
Yeah.
you can't access all your resources, and then you always have that pain. It's sort of like if you know, like an injury or something you never take care of, and so now you can go back and mend it, and it's a lot easier once you have the tools to
Yeah.
mend it to
Yeah.
be able to go back and
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
So I think the point that we're getting to here is that
The metaphor is brilliant. It's like if you want to get immune to a disease, either you catch this terrible disease
and go through all that pain
and go through
suffering.
all that pain of getting ill, getting sick, and almost dying, and you don't know if you'll survive, or you can
Take
get
the
a shot.
vaccine.
Take the vaccine.
Yeah.
So when you don't, what my experience is that sometimes if you don't learn the tools, if you don't ask for help, if you don't actively choose transformation, then when life throws at you and forces you to transform, it really does feel like getting sick. And after that, you're immune, but it was hell.
Yeah, but you can absolutely be proactive about this, and when you know what your values are, and you translate them as qualities in the self-concept, and then you build them in, and you strengthen them, you transform them. You adapt much easier, and you also behave in the ways that you want to behave rather than being reactive. You're more responsive to these situations. And I remember, man, the first year that I was working with this model, it was when I was going through many transformations, and I was just working the model daily. That was one of the greatest years of my life, and there was no extraordinary accomplishments that I had. There was no, I mean, eventually those came later because I sorted so much of my life out at that time. But I remember just being so happy, and then just going to Steve and saying, I actually am wondering how happy can I get using this model? And because when you're living your values, when you know what they are and you're living them, that's what meaning and purpose is about. That's what being happy is about. That's what self-esteem is. That's what true confidence is. And you're being your authentic self. So it feels great. And so now I look for new challenges to do with the model. And now my challenge has been, well, it changed into using the model with my clients, which I wasn't sure if it was going to work. Started getting great results from my clients. And then this latest challenge was to actually turn the training into an online training, which happened to be far more challenging than I expected. It took a lot longer than I expected, but here we are. So the training is, you can get immediate access to it. Enrollment, like I said, closes on this Saturday. But as soon as you sign up, you get immediate access. You don't have to wait for me to do videos. They're all done, and you can go on. You can see the trainings. You can also see the videos I've done with Lulu where I'm actually demonstrating the model. And you will be admitted to a private Facebook group with other students, the other students who have signed up for the program. And you can ask questions, which I respond to all of the questions. And I will be going live in that private group, not live like this, which is like everywhere, millions of people now. But I get to go live in the private group so that I can do real-time coaching with the group. And basically what I'm wanting to do, and I feel very grateful and joyful to be passing on this training and to be passing on the way that Steve mentored me, which was mostly by Skype and by email. I'm very happy to be passing that on the same way, and that's the idea behind this training. I'm trying to replicate what he did for me for all of you, and it brings me great joy and humble gratitude to do that.
I have one more question.
We're completely out of time. Actually,
Really?
no, we don't have any time limits here,
Really?
except for when the webinar starts tonight at 5.
I have one more question.
Sure, go.
So it's also related to resistance in the process of transformation. This is my recent experience that sometimes if I have a breakthrough, usually letting go of something or getting in touch with something that I pushed away a long time ago, if it's a painful thing, like I would have this feeling of like feeling really broken, and then I'm like, okay, I broke through this, that whatever that locking, limiting thing was gone, and then I feel like I'm at the bottom of something, and then now what? Do you have you ever experienced that, and how does this model help with that? You sound like you resonate. Yay!
Well, yes, of course, I've had that, but it was kind of was kind of vague. So my first response was, well, everybody has experienced what you said, because it's a very, I don't mean vague, I mean it's vague in general, so that there's a lot of experiences that could fit into what you just said. So can you be a little more specific, or even use a real example?
Okay, I'll use a real example. For example, if I have a belief or a story, which is very related to Chinese culture. Chinese culture believe that, you kind of have to prove that you're worthy of being loved, right? You have to.
Oh yeah.
You have to be good enough. You have to have good grades or whatever.
That's not just Chinese culture.
No, okay, it's not just Chinese culture. You have to have good grades or be pretty or whatever. You have to meet a certain standard. If I'm not good enough, then I'm not lovable. That kind of connection. And there is once that I experienced breaking through that and realizing the impact of that and letting that go, and it was painful, but then there's this feeling of like, okay, well, there has been my motivation of doing things and improving has been this, right? Has been that dangle the carrot in front of you, the conditional love kind of thing. I'll achieve more so that people like me more. But once this is broken, I'm kind of stuck in a limbo kind of feeling. And there are other things too. It's like realizing, oh, I'm chasing after something, but now it's not there anymore. And then you're like, so now what? Would you say that with this model you won't run into that scenario, or you can save yourself from that scenario?
Well, yeah, and it will take some work depending on your situation. What you're talking about was very similar to what I was talking about, where we go chasing values that were taught to us to value, not our own personal values. So we go out there, and I know you've achieved a lot of things at a very young age. And there are people who are really good at this, and there are people who are really bad at it, achieving what we call other esteem, or searching for other esteem. We have self-esteem, and fulfilling your own values will give you self-esteem. When your self-concept is aligned with your values, self-esteem is automatic. If you go chasing other esteem, so the values that your culture gives you, society gives you, your parents hand down to you and tell you this is what's important, there's actually nothing bad about going after those values, as long as you know that those are the other values, they're not your personal values. So you're not disappointed when you achieve the goal and you don't get the fulfillment that you're expecting.
Right.
You're just not going to get that if the value is something that others value and you only picked up because others value it. If it's status, that's a big one. Status involves comparing yourself to others. So you will always lose at that game. You'll win. You'll feel good sometimes when you feel superior. Like I can compare myself to that person, and he has less money than I do, and he doesn't drive as nice of a car, and then that will make me feel really good, right? But then I'm going to crash as soon as I meet the person who makes more money than me and drives a nicer car.
Yeah.
So you're always going to lose the comparison game. So just knock that off right now. But when you know what your own personal values are, you can go fulfill those. I mean, like I said, I'm doing that now. I do it in the morning whenever I write in my journal, or when I go to jiu-jitsu, even when I get my lip busted. I'm fulfilling values all the time. And so it takes that guesswork out of it, and I'm enjoying myself. Now, I think the other part of your question is a really big question. And I wasn't planning on staying on this long, but now that we're on, if any of you out there have questions, go ahead and start throwing them out there. We'll start answering them. I'm having a good time. Are you?
I am. Me too.
Do you have to be anywhere else or do anything?
I don't have to be anywhere else, but it sounds like I already have the answer that I just asked you.
Okay. Well, I do want to talk about self-worth because it's something that I suffered from all my life.
Oh, really?
I'm 40 years old. I think I finally. It was about 2 years ago, and it was doing a lot of work with this model and also being mentored by Steve, where I feel like I turned that corner and I finally, I don't want to say like, oh, I'll never have these experiences again. I'll never feel lack of self-worth or need to prove myself ever again. You never know when those things might pop up again, so I don't want to say never. But if it does, I know exactly how to deal with that. And a lot of us suffer from self-worth. And a part of that, I can just tell you really quickly, the reason why we do that, and it has a lot to do with what you were just saying. When you're very young and you don't really understand conditional love and unconditional love, a child just unconditionally loves, especially the people who are feeding them,
Yeah.
housing them, and giving them love, and they don't know, they're just receiving it, and they know, and it feels good, so they're just a kid receiving love and giving love, and then at some point, something gets communicated to the child. The child goes, oh my God, that might be taken away from me. I might, and it, as an adult, as a father myself, it's scary to think that sometimes my kids might be interpreting some of my messages to them as I will withdraw love from you if you don't do what I want you to do. And I think some parents are bad parents and would actually communicate in those exact words, but I think most parents don't do that. But you don't know how your kids are interpreting it. But I would ultimately put the responsibility.
My parents think that will motivate me to become a better person.
Right, and a lot of parents do communicate in some way to their kids, like dangling the carrot. Well, go do this because, why don't you be more like Johnny or Sarah? And then suddenly you start comparing yourself to others, and you go, oh, well, if I don't do what they're saying, could they take away that love? Oh, I better go and earn that love. I better make good grades. I better do what I need to do in order to keep that love or earn that love. So what happens is that the kid picks up this concept of self-worth, which is actually absolutely ridiculous. How could anyone judge your worth, including yourself? No one can. No one can judge your worth or your value. Not you, not anyone. There is no such thing. You do not have a right to live, love, be happy. We either all have it or we all don't have it. But at some point, a limited communicator will limit, with their limited communication, will communicate to a child that they need to deserve love and earn love or earn worth and value. And a lot of times it's not intentional on the adult's part, but it's just the way that the kid interprets it. And, I might be guilty of that with my kids. It's one of those things that once I learned this, I was like, oh man, I better be very careful about how I communicate to my kids so they don't think that. But what happens, that sticks with the kid, and then it goes unconscious, but it's still there. And so they grow up thinking that they have to earn love, they have to prove themselves, they have to, be worthy, and you have this horrible self-worth condition that keeps us from achieving. It keeps us from being happy. It makes us insecure. And using this model, transforming qualities and working with this technology, I eventually overcame that, as far as I can tell. Mm-hmm. So,
You digressed, but that's okay.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I hope you out there at least liked it.
Yeah. So it sounds like that when you're talking about, looking for, what you really value, right? It's so the other day we were talking and I was saying, like, even if you find yourself to be someone who is already, even if you find yourself to be someone who is always to try to fulfill other people's expectation of you, that still has a positive intent behind it. And that might actually reflect your deeper value.
Absolutely.
Right. And so what you do, instead of saying like, oh, now I'm just going to not fulfill other people's expectations of me and just crash that, and you kind of feel lost and be like, now what? But this helps you to find what's your positive intent behind trying to make your parents happy or your wife or husband happy. And then the value behind that, so you go fulfill that value, that deeper value instead
Right.
of feeling like really lost and what's the next thing I should do.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring that up because my parents are actually in town visiting me right now. But yes, that's absolutely correct. And a lot of times what that positive intent is of fulfilling others' expectations is love, to be loved. And they feel like, well, if I can make my parents happy or I can make other people happy, then I will be loved. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. I mean, they either love you or you don't, or they don't. If they only love you if you fulfill their expectations, then that person or those people are probably not, they don't truly love you, you know. So you want to get in touch with that feeling. Your projections are an indication of what value you already have inside of you. So if I'm looking at something and I'm saying, well, I wish that person loved me, what I'm actually doing is taking the love that is already inside of me and projecting it onto that person, as if I have to dangle that carrot and get that person to love me, or else I'm not loved. And it's not like
I
that at all.
think for me, the value is actually peace. It's like if I do what they say, they won't like argue with each other or hit me or curse me or something like that.
Well, when you leave it up to other people, you don't know if they're going to accept that. You don't know if they're, even if you can fulfill their expectations, and they might say, "Oh, good job. Okay, go do this for me," or else, you know, or whatever.
And they're still not happy.
And they're still not happy. Yeah.
Still throw a tantrum in the house.
Well, if you've played that game before, trying to please people, you know that even if you can please them, it's temporary, and they're just going to want more. So it's about finding. So a lot of times it is about peace. It's about love. And so what I teach you in this model is to access that within yourself, and then build it in as a quality of who you are. And so when you are that, when you are love and you are peace, or you're a loving person and a peaceful person, you're naturally going to attract people who are loving and peaceful and who appreciate those qualities. And then if they don't, you're secure enough to just be like, well, okay, you know, if you can't appreciate it, and it's not about being mean about it or anything. You just, okay, they don't appreciate it. That's fine with me. You know, I don't expect everybody to appreciate everything that I do. I'm just noticing that really looks bad.
So to conclude, this self-concept model is the ultimate game. It will blow everything out of the water, and it's not painful, and you won't get lost. Am I correct?
Well, you will get lost, and that's why you get access to the private
well,
Facebook
not
group. So
like you will need help, but not that kind of, you know, I'm completely smashed or crashed and now what, that kind of
the
lost.
idea is not to kill your ego. The idea is to change you the way you, or to understand how your ego, which is another way of saying self-concept, how you've created it, how you can change it. You've been creating your self-concept. It's a process, not a thing. So you've been creating it since you were born.
So you're like gently molding your ego instead of like crashing it and building it from scratch?
If you want to crash it, you can, but I don't recommend it. I don't recommend doing it that way. But your self-concept has more or less been created haphazardly. You weren't conscious of it. It just sort of happened and assembled itself unconsciously mostly. But now you can make it conscious and understand how it works so that you can change it. And for most of us, our self-concepts don't work very well. They don't work as well as they could. We're not achieving our potential. I know a handful of people who I would say were just kind of like born with creating a very solid, strong self-concept that's not arrogant or overinflated, and they do achieve a lot because they believe that they can, and they don't fear failure. So I do know a handful of these people, but I would say most of us need some work, and I'm definitely a good example of someone who needed a lot of work, and I worked it, and I would have to say I've had amazing transformations, and my life is strikingly close to exactly how I want it to be. It's never going to be perfect, and that's another thing you have to watch out for is perfection. That's as bad as comparing yourself to others, so let the perfection go. Sometimes working with this model, it will be sloppy, and that's just life. That's how it is.
So you would say that the transformation you experience with this model is nowhere near as painful as some of the stuff you had before.
It's never been painful. The only times, I mean, like I said, there were
but you had that ego death experience.
I will say that sometimes when I'm working with people, they cry. I cried, but it's more about like, it's not sad tears or painful tears. I've been coaching people at times, and they kind of get a feeling of where I'm taking them, and they start to get scared, and then I'll just say, look, this is what you came to me for. Is this what you want? They're like, yeah, but I don't know if I'm ready to make this change. And so we'll work that out, but and you'll come up against that. Sometimes you'll experience
What should
fears.
they do if they get scared?
Well, that's what we call a congruence check, and I was talking about that earlier. It's resistance coming up because there's a part of you that is concerned about something, whatever it might be. And a lot of times it has to do with protecting you. So you bring that part out and you find out what its positive intent is, and then you reframe it. You want your parts working with you and integrated. A lot of times people say, "Hey, I got this resistance, and I just want you to help me get rid of it." No. We don't get rid of anything. That would be like, my hand hurts. Okay, well, let's go chop it off. It's like, no, we don't do that.
Right. You take care of your hand.
We so if there's a part of you that's wounded or that's resisting, we automatically in NLP we say everything comes from a positive intent. So we understand that this resistance is coming from a positive intent. So let's find out what that positive intent is, and let's reframe it and update the program.
So it teaches you to take care of whatever brings up that is painful or scary, so you don't need to be scared about taking this program.
Right. I had never thought that anybody would be afraid of doing this until she started asking me these questions this morning. I was like, it makes a lot of sense. I would have never thought that people would be afraid of this, but a lot of people are afraid of change.
Yes.
It's amazing, and I've been faced with this a few times too, like actually being afraid of getting everything that I want, because once I get everything that I want, then what else would I want, or what else
That's
would I
exactly
get?
what I'm talking about. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Well,
yeah, it's like this, now what?
This brings me to another good point that came out of our conversation this morning, is that I'm not saying there aren't limits to this model. I'm not saying there aren't limitations to it. All models have limitations and limits, and NLP models that I've been through, I've reached the limitations of them. I see where, like, okay, this model doesn't do any more than this, okay? And not just NLP, there's been other models too that I just get to the end of it and say, okay, well, this is where the limitations are. I've yet to find the limitations of the self-concept model. And I told Steve this, and I said, because in the 4 years that I've been practicing it, not just on myself, but with my clients, the model seems to grow as you grow. And that's a kind of a hard thing to explain, but they're like, again, I'm not saying there aren't any limitations to it.
I can exemplify this. It's like, oh my God, I value that value. Let me work on that. And then now that value sounds great. And then it just right. Kind of grows like a tree.
Well, it's like saying, is it possible to fulfill my potential to the point that I have no more potential left? And that can never be. As long as you're alive, you have some potential for something, for anything. You can fulfill a certain potential and then move on to the next, but there will always be potential in you to fulfill until you're dead.
Right.
So in that sense, you will always have values. You will always be finding new values or new ways to fulfill those values. And it goes back to that jiu-jitsu puzzle, like my instructor said. And you can do jiu-jitsu your entire life. And the Gracie family, the patriarch of the family, who died in like 10 years ago, he was in his 90s. He was still teaching like 20 days up till just before his death. And he had been doing jiu-jitsu for like more than 60 years. He was still learning. So as long as he was alive, there was still potential for him to come up with new techniques and new ways of doing or putting the puzzle together. So the puzzle of you is limitless, and this model is a great way to explore that puzzle and put the pieces together.
This sounds too good to be true.
That's what I thought whenever I
really
first. Yeah. I was just like, this was amazing.
Okay.
So I've gotten used to that though.
Okay, so it's time to up your standards and join this training and get into this game of new kind of transformation, whatever that is.
And like I said, if you want to know more about it, there's it's about a 50-minute webinar this evening at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard. Also tomorrow, Thursday evening at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So there's about a 50-minute webinar, and then I stay on to answer questions. And I stay on and answer all questions, until everybody's questions are answered. So check that out. And then if you want to just go straight to the training, you want to access it now. I'm losing my voice. If you want to access it now, The links will be in there to go straight to the page and access the training now. And you get immediate access, lifetime access, and you get mentoring and support along the way.
Great, great.
You have anything else?
No, it's just you want to sum up this model in one sentence, all the benefits. Test on your memory.
That's what the webinar is for.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Anyway, okay, so
Painless.
So here's some benefits. You will have automatic self-esteem, confidence, meaning, and purpose in your life. This is not like affirmations. I also talk about in the webinar why affirmations don't work. I also talk about the problems with the law of attraction and the secret. This is not something that you constantly have to work at like that, or like pump yourself up or build yourself up or build up your state. Once you make these changes, they stick unless you have congruence issues, which I talk about and how to deal with those. And then sometimes you make a change and you still have some tweaks and some fine tuning to do. So it's, you have those sorts of things. But in general, once you make a change, it's done, and then you move on.
And it doesn't have to be painful.
Using this model has never been painful, except when there have been times where like painful memories have come up. But that's just telling me, hey, it's time to deal with this.
That's the memory that's painful. It's not the model.
Yeah.
Right.
So transformation is not painful. It's the clinging to the old and clinging to the old ways of who you are, who you were, that makes it painful. All right. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. I will respond to them. And of course, if you come to the webinar this evening or tomorrow evening, I will be answering your questions there as well. And I hope to see all of you there. Take care.
See ya. We talked for a long time.
We did.